This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to modelcitizendiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. Hi everybody, welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice, and greetings to all of you listening from places like Greensboro, North Carolina, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Oceanside, California, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Wellington, New Zealand, and Corvera, Spain. And if you're new to the show, welcome aboard. We talk about everything from motorcycles to Model Ts here, but always with a firm grasp on the people and stories behind the machines. And I try to mix it up as much as possible for you and keep it fun, so be sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what you hear, tell your friends about the show and help me grow the audience. We're going to get right into it. My guest today is someone I've been wanting to have on the show for years, and his resume is so interesting. I'm really thrilled about this one. Sinuhe Xavier is a director, filmmaker, photographer, writer, creative director, conservationist, overlander, and adventurer. And I'm sure I missed a couple in there. He's also a former professional skier. He's explored remote areas from Montana to Morocco. And he's a longtime Land Rover owner. And as many of you know, I'm a Land Rover guy too. So we had a lot to talk about. And I think we covered just about everything in that list. And even if we weren't around a campfire when we recorded this, which was the original plan, by the way, it kind of had the same feel. And you know, those are always great conversations when you're out under the stars and you're kind of huddled around that glow. Now, before we get started, I want to ask you to become a sponsor of the show. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and support the show with a donation. You can make it a one-time contribution or a regular contribution if you like. And leave me 5 stars and a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well, because that helps new people discover the show. All right, without further ado, here's my conversation with Sinuhe Xavier, right here on Horsepower Heritage. You and I have a lot in common. Overlanding, motorcycles, filmmaking, photography, a love of machines in general, you know, so much stuff we have in common. But a lot of these things have been professional activities for you, not just fun. So it's really exciting to sit down with you. But I want to talk about overlanding. How did you get into overlanding?
So for me, at the time, it was 1997, 96, I think, living in Vail, Colorado. I had been dating Shaika Gramshammer, whose father's Peppy Gramshammer. Her brother-in-law had done the Camel Trophy. And he came back and he had this Camel Trophy truck. It had, you know, the battle wrap on the winch, and it, you know, it was right in the middle of Vail Village. And I was instantly like, what is this? Like, this is so cool. You know, and this is long before the internet ever existed. You couldn't just go look it up. But he had some photos. You know, he showed me photos that I think you say his name,
Nick Dimbleby.
Dimbleby, yeah.
Yeah, he's actually been on the show.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah, the best guy. I mean, that guy, I met Nick when we were doing the Great Divide expedition.
Okay.
And we're on top of Engineer Pass, and Nick's in a vest and shorts, and it's snowing. Like, he's such but that's a total sidebar. But, you know, I'd seen these photos, and it just, it made it accessible, if that made sense. And I ended up getting, you know, the least expensive Land Rover I could get, which was a 95 5-speed Discovery with no sunroofs, and, you know, which today is the holy grail of
Totally.
discoveries, and I had that for a long time. And the way I think, long before it was branded overlanding, because I think that happened probably the late 2000s, Jonathan Hansen and Scott Brady created Overland Journal, Expedition Portal. To me, it had always been these little mini expeditions, car camping, but
Right.
with a white Land Rover, it was an expedition.
And the other sort of cultural marker for the overlanding title was Expedition Exchange.
Well, yes, in Expedition Exchange, John Lee and Ho Chung, who owned Expedition Exchange, they were amazing because they didn't care about Land Cruisers, they didn't care about Jeeps. It was only Land Rovers, and it was only products that they used and believed in. They wouldn't sell you anything that they hadn't used before. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I'd go in there wanting to bolt something onto my Discovery, add something because I thought it was cool, and John Lee just going, "No, that's some rookie shit."
Right.
And he really taught me the importance of simplicity, and that whole crew in the early 2000s, they were all doing this stuff in Southern California, Utah, and it was all Land Rover based, but in a very pure fashion where it wasn't about all the stuff you could bolt on. It was about going out, about being able to do a field repair, learning ham radio, getting your license, the whole program. And I learned from those guys.
Plus, Bill Burke was doing his off-road instruction, and it was kind of like, wow, this guy is using this Defender in a way that most Americans wouldn't, because most Defenders were pretty much pavement queens at the time.
Yeah, it was really interesting because he was, and his was so beat up. I mean,
Right.
It had been flopped on. He didn't bother fixing it, and he was the guru of that whole thing. Because he was a Camel Trophy alumni. I'm not sure which year, but it was, everyone kind of looked up to Bill Burke at that time as far as learning the recovery aspects of things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a really amazing time.
Yeah, there was a real, it was like stone soup, All of a sudden, all these ingredients kept getting added, and then you had overlanding as a thing.
Right, and that came in, I really see that as, again, Scott Brady and Jonathan Hansen had come together and created Overland Journal. And Scott Brady, for a time, had Expeditions West, which was kind of a blog. It was a little trip report thing that he'd done some pretty significant trips, up to the Arctic and whatnot. And they came in and they really they said, Overland Journal, and what we're doing is overlanding. And they branded it, and they created this whole market, essentially.
Really smart.
Yeah.
Really ahead of the curve. And
yeah, it's pretty incredible to see what's happened with it, in the sense of the market that it created out of essentially car camping. It's not really, for what we're doing here in North America, in the West, where we have all these great public lands that we have access to, it's car camping.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've created a market has created this need for all these doodads is pretty incredible.
Well, and social media had a lot to do with that, in the last 5-10 years too. And also the growth of aftermarket parts and everything, like you were saying.
Sure. And I think, for me, and I can only speak to myself, the initial shock and awe of seeing Ken Cameron's Camel Trophy truck, it immediately took me to thoughts of Indiana Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Here's my buy-in to my cosplay Indiana Jones. Being able to go out into the desert, drive around, get myself unstuck, live out of the back of a truck for, weeks on end. That was it for me. And I think that really, as we kind of came into, the 2010s, 2015 zone, that really resonated with people to, get out and do things. And you've seen these different branches of it where it's gone, the super survivalist tactical mode, to the purists where, there's still guys out there, like yourself out in a series,
Right.
going out with a water bag, and that's amazing. And to me, it's like, if you're going to go out, like, that's great. And if you need all that gear to make yourself comfortable and have a great experience, awesome. Good for you.
Well, I have to confess, though, that for years I overpacked. I brought way too much stuff. I mean, I'm talking like I would bring multiple pieces of cast iron for cooking. Like, that's ridiculous. I would bring spare parts that would rust before I actually needed them. That impulse is hard to overcome, but you just have to get more and more trips under your belt. And the more you do, the less you'll take.
Well, there's that old indigenous saying, and I can't remember who it was. I think it's a Maasai, and it's the less you know, the more you carry on your back. Or maybe it's the more you know, the less you carry on your back. And it's so true.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, that even though you can carry it, you're ending up putting so much more wear and tear on your truck.
Oh, yeah.
All that weight. And to see these trucks that are so far over GVW, it's really insane.
Yeah.
Like I travel with a Jetboil, even though I could travel with a full cans kitchen. I do a Jetboil because if I'm out there by myself, and most of my travel is solo travel, I'm not cooking a big elaborate meal, and the lighter you are, the better your gas mileage is, the more technical of a trail you can do, all those things. There's so many advantages to being light and not having all that stuff bolted on.
Absolutely.
But if you need it and you want it, like, go for it.
Knock yourself out. Yeah. I was once on a trip in Northern California, and this 86-year-old guy showed up in camp, and he had, I think, a 72 Land Rover, beat up. He carried with him a piece of foam to sleep on, a blanket, a pillow, a loaf of white bread, some mayonnaise, and some bologna, and like 10 gallons of water. And that's all this guy had. Because I looked in his truck and it was completely empty. I mean, for 4 days he was out there like that, and he was totally happy.
Yeah, I is a story we could get into later, but when my first introduction into the Canyonlands was very randomly with Seldom Seen Smith, Ken Slate of the Edward Abbey fame. And we went into Canyonlands in his Jeep that I don't even know what it was, but we went back there. We had nothing. There was nothing. And, for me, my big evolutions were learning to travel by motorcycle. Once I did that, I realized how little I needed. And then I did a trip into Africa from Portugal. And the crew that I was with out of Portugal, I mean, full on Euro style. I was like, where's, we're packing things up. I go, where's the recovery gear? Where's the tool? This whole list of things that weighs your truck down. And they're like, if we get a flat tire, we've got that stuff. I've got a spare fuel filter. But otherwise we'll deal with it there.
Right.
And that we went all the way from Lisbon to Marrakesh through, through skirting the Sahara, over the Atlas Mountains. And we had a few little things go wrong, but you figure it out,
Sure.
And you didn't need a spare truck packed in a Pelican.
Incredible. How many trucks were on that expedition?
3.
That's like
3 Defender 90s. Yeah.
Basically the perfect complement.
Well, I learned, again, and this was one of Jack Quinlan's tenets of traveling was, 2 to 5 is the perfect.
Yeah.
And 3 is ideal because you can get everybody out from somewhere in an emergency. Anything more than 5, and you're making such a large impact on your campsites when you pull over. I see these trains. I was in the Mojave and coming across the Mojave Road on one of my commutes, and I saw 15 trucks coming across the Mojave Road. And it's like, why? I'm a bit of an introvert, and it's not that I don't like people. It's just I don't understand why we need to be around people all the time. And when I saw that, it was, because it's a huge dust plume going up. And if I'm going the opposite direction, then I've got to wait, 10 minutes for these cars to come by because they're all spread out because they don't want to be eating each other's dust. And then you think of 15 cars, how much space that takes up in the backcountry. And they slowly start making what was a 3-4 car spot into this 15 car worn out zone. It's a big impact.
It is. And anything you do in a group that big takes 3 times as long as it should, whether you're stopping to use the bathroom, getting water, maybe scouting, whatever you're doing, even if you're just passing oncoming traffic, it multiplies the time and the complexity. I'm with you on that. I think that's mainly that's a function of club activities, club trips.
Yeah.
And there's a place for it, I guess. But if you're going to a big jamboree somewhere, where there's a base camp, and then you can split off in small groups, that's really ideal. But if you're doing point to point over days at a time, it's not good. Your 2 to 5 is exactly right.
Yeah, I think that's an ideal number, and hopefully people kind of start figuring that. I think it should be a tread lightly principle,
totally,
that they add in there. But we'll see what they say. I preach it.
I mean, it's just a lot. It makes sense in so many ways, but it's also just a lot more pleasant. It's logistically better. It's better for the environment, like you say. It's better for just your general enjoyment on those trips. It's more practical. By the way, the Mojave Road, when's the last time you did the Mojave Road? I'm just curious.
Well, this is something we should probably touch on is, living in Colorado. I lived in LA for 17 years. And before that, I was living in Colorado, working in LA. And the commute between Colorado and here it's been the way I go back and forth. And I-15, I-70, it gets boring after a while. If you need to turn and burn, you can do it in 12 hours. I manage to usually do it in 3 to 4 days. And I drive as many back roads as I can. And that's how I ended up developing the Utah Traverse. And so getting on the Mojave Road, I'm on the Mojave Road usually once every 3 or 4 months, a section of it.
That's great.
Just to because I want to avoid traffic on I-15, and I'll just drop down and hop on it for a bit, see 15 Toyotas and bail.
Right. Take a look at Kelso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get
off at Baker and go to Little Cow Hole, that area.
Yep. Yeah. I'll usually come down through Searchlight actually, and cut across there because there's such great ranges on the eastern part's the most empty, right. And it's incredible out there, those Joshua Tree forests.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I know you know this, but I didn't learn this until I'd done the Mojave Road 3 or 4 times. It actually goes all the way to San Luis Obispo.
Oh, I had no idea.
That leg of it is largely unknown, and it's so disconnected now. But basically, you can pick it up in Ridgecrest and keep going all the way to the coast.
Oh, wow.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it probably cut through that army base that's there, right?
Yeah. I wish I could remember exactly. There's definitely some areas that you can't go directly through.
Right.
But yeah, that was historically the full route all the way to the coast. Pretty amazing. Yeah. And it makes sense because, so we're talking about, this is real local knowledge. A lot of my listeners are probably a little bit lost, and I apologize, you guys, but the Mojave Road was initially a footpath, and various Indian tribes traded with each other along that footpath. And it goes from Needles, California, what is now Needles, California, all the way to San Luis Obispo out on the coast. And so tribes like the Paiute in the desert and the Chumash near the coast would end up trading with each other, and that was their route. Then it became a wagon trail, then a truck trail, and now it's a historic off-road trail. But you can do it. You can do most of it in a Toyota Corolla if you drive carefully.
Yeah, I mean, there was that section from what's that road that goes down from Prim?
I think not Kelbaker Road.
Not Kelbaker, the one that's out east. It goes directly north-south. But that from there over to Kelbaker Road, SEMA Road, totally great. You could Corolla. You can drift that thing through every turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know who loves the Mojave Road? Germans. Germans who off-road and expedition travel love the Mojave Road. I've met more Germans out there than anyone else from elsewhere.
And the amazing thing about that is they're out there in July and August.
They are.
The Germans love the heat.
Yep. Same with Death Valley, Sailing Valley. I meet them out there too. Yeah. They're game for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I met a couple that had an enormous Unimog, a really new one. And I can't remember what series it was. This was in like 2010, 2012 maybe. But yeah, they were fully kitted out. Talk about traveling with everything and not traveling light. But I met him at the Devil's Racetrack in Death Valley.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's pretty cool that's the other thing about overlanding. I mean, I know you say you're a little bit of an introvert and you sort of value your time away from humanity, but you can meet some amazing people out on the trail in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, like I really appreciate that. And I appreciate people one-on-one, you know, and yes. I love running into those interesting folks that are out there traveling and hearing their story of how they ended up out there. And it's usually the bigger the shit box they're driving, the better the story.
Yeah, that's totally true. And since you say that, it makes me think of, I mean, not to get like too philosophical or psychoanalytical, but for the most part, I would say it. I'm an extrovert, but I can understand maybe this feeling inside, like if you're in a group of people, there's many conversations going on and your time is divided between too many people. I don't like that either. Is that sort of what you mean by?
That's an interesting take on it. I haven't really thought of it, but I definitely do, you know, really appreciate that one-on-one time over having to juggle a bunch of different people, you know. And when I'm out there and I see one other person, you know, going the opposite way or on the side of the road, you know, I'll usually stop and say hi and, you know, see if they need anything, if everything's good. If I see more than 2 or 3 trucks, I just keep going.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are fine.
That's one reason, by the way, I love doing the podcast is this one-on-one is great. And I can schedule to sit down with a guest and that time is blocked out and my phone is on Do Not Disturb and the world goes away. And that's really, it's rewarding. I will be exhausted, but also refreshed when we're done today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is maybe my 3rd or 4th podcast, and I really enjoy doing them. You know, it's really fun because of the back and forth, and you learn about someone else. You know, it's always good.
Yeah, and it gives you a chance to think about stuff that maybe you haven't thought about in a while, or because we're so busy in our daily lives, you know, things get crowded out. Interesting that you talk about seeing that Camel Trophy Defender, because I remember the first time that I saw a series Land Rover and was blown away. It was in a mall parking lot, and I was, I think, 18 years old, and I was driving an F-150 pickup at the time, which the payments were killing me as a college kid. And I saw this Land Rover, and I spent like 10 minutes just circling it. You know, it was a 63, the pastel green, paint peeling here and there. It was definitely, you know, had lived a good life because it was like an old worn pair of jeans, you know. And I sold that F-150 within 6 months and bought a complete basket case 1964 Land Rover and restored it in my neighbor had a dirt lot behind his house, and I restored it in that lot. Every day when I had a chance, I would take the tarps off, turn some wrenches as long as I could, and then put the tarps back on and just repeat the process. Rinse and repeat. And I owned that truck for over 20 years. It was the truck that I learned how to go overlanding in and learned how to operate a 4x4. Sold it to a great friend who's enjoying it to this day.
That's amazing.
So, but it wasn't until later that I remembered that I had already been imprinted on this stuff. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and the film Born Free and a little Matchbox, or maybe it was a dinky, a little Matchbox Land Rover that I had in a shoebox that I found years later. All these childhood imprints that came back only when I was an adult. I had forgotten all about that, but subconsciously it was still there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a film that I always go back to is The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Yep.
I mean, and anybody that sees that film goes, well, I would never own one of those cars. But there's a magic to these Land Rovers that you just can't duplicate anywhere else. You know, they're incredible machines, and they're so much fun to drive. Cooper and I, my son, we restored a 1962 Series 2A. Well, he was very young, and he sorted bolts for me in the bed, and it was amazing. It was so much fun.
That
it was
counts.
Such a great project. Yeah, it was such a great project.
Do you still have that truck?
No, I sold it. Probably 6 years ago now.
Do you ever miss the ones that you've gotten rid of?
It's funny. I don't miss the series was an itch that needed to be scratched.
Right.
Same with the Defender, the D90 that I had. The Discovery I do miss.
Yeah.
It was the perfect blend of the Range Rover and D90, where it had all the capabilities of the D90 and had the comfort of the Range Rover.
Yep.
I miss that truck. It was such a great truck, and it never, ever once left me stranded. It would break down in my driveway when I got home, but 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 5,000 mile trips down Baja, into Utah, that sort of thing.
Right.
Never once.
Right.
Did I have to call a tow truck? Did I have to take it into a shop while I was out there? I mean, I've limped it home on, one drive shaft.
Yep.
Limped it home with, just front brakes or, something, but it always came back.
I've had that same experience, and they just keep it might be running on, it might be 2 cylinders down, but it's going to get you home.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Utah Traverse. That's so interesting.
Yeah, the Utah Traverse. It all really started in about 1998, 1999. I was in Utah on assignment for National Geographic Adventure with Steve Casimiro, and we were put into this little teeny town in Utah that I'm not going to mention because it's so amazing. I don't want people to ruin it. But we were there for like 2 weeks, and we drove 3,500 miles all over this section of Utah that I'd never really been to, because Moab's such a magnet. Everybody goes to Moab. Everybody knows Moab. It's the name of shoes. It's the name of a jacket. It's the name of a sleeping bag, whatever. This zone was totally new to me, and it really opened the door to the last 25 years of my life. And so as I was working in LA, living in Colorado at the time before I met Cooper's mother, I started driving through this section, and on the old gazetteers I was marking campsites. And one day we were hanging out, and I can't remember who it was, but we were looking at it. It was spread open. The map was spread open, and you could see the route, and I started thinking of this, route like the Continental Divide route, like, these kind of, there's become the backcountry discovery routes. There's the Trans-America Trail, the TAT.
Right. Which goes from Missouri to Oregon or something?
Yeah, Missouri, Arkansas, all the way out to Oregon. Yeah. It's an incredible trail. I mean, I don't know why you do anything east of the Continental Divide, but whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. Well, the Trans-America would be great on motorcycle.
Exactly. I think it's more of the guy that developed it was a motorcycle guy.
Yeah.
So,
see, like I asked you about the Utah Traverse, and already we're talking about the Trans-America. But
yeah, so there are these kind of trails that people have developed, and for me, it was a chance to develop a trail across Utah, which was really, the zone that I was most familiar exploring. And basically it goes from Mesquite, Nevada, all the way to Telluride, 900 miles. It zigzags. It looks like a cracked out EKG.
And I'm sure the elevation changes have got to be gnarly.
The elevation changes are gnarly. It really is trying to hit the high points of across the Colorado Plateau. So, you hit Powell Point, you hit Bull Run Pass, you hit Bobby's Hole, Elk Ridge. And it's from these spots, you get to see and feel what the Colorado Plateau is all about. The Henry Mountains, the last mountain range in the lower continental U.S. that was explored by Henry Powell.
As in Lake Powell, right?
As in Lake Powell, yes. And, when you're going over Elk Ridge, dropping down into Beef Basin, it's Abbey country. It's an incredible route.
I just have to interject. If people haven't read Edward Abbey, a desert dweller, a recluse sometime, environmentalist wacko by some measure, but a fascinating writer.
It's one of my books that I absolutely recommend to everybody. I read it probably once a year, is Desert Solitaire.
There it is.
And it's the book that, it informed me so much on the Colorado Plateau. And it really, for me, it really made me dig deeper into the desert and realize that it's such a complex place. Deserts aren't just these vast wastelands. They're really complex. And I really love, the Colorado Plateau. So with the Utah Traverse, this route, this 900 miles, it's been fantastic. I've done it, numerous times in trucks, and I've done it once on a motorcycle. The motorcycle, we decided to go over Elephant Hill and down Bobby's Hole. And that was, one of the more challenging days I've ever had in my life.
Describe these features.
So Bobby's Hole and Elephant Hill, they're in the Needles district of Canyonlands. And Bobby's Hole is a four-wheel drive track that drops down about 500 feet. And it's nothing but dynamited boulders the size of half Volkswagens. And it's hard enough to drive up in a truck. It was absolutely nightmarish to get big 1200 GS motorcycles down.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely nightmarish.
It's like trying to ride a giraffe down.
Oh yeah.
A rock scree.
Yeah, exactly. It was, we started our day at, I think, 7 a.m. and we didn't get out until probably midnight or 1. And Elephant Hill was the real challenge. And Elephant Hill it's really the gateway into the Needles. It's where the pavement ends in the Needles district. And it comes up over this hill, but it's full of rock ledges and these switchbacks, these really steep switchbacks, where if you're in a car, you actually have to back down this section.
Oh, wow.
Where you can't turn around, and you're dropping down these 16-inch ledges. It's one of the most technical four-wheel drive sections in any national park or anything. And we got to the bottom of Elephant Hill just as the sun was going down.
Oh, wow. Lucky you.
So, yeah, it was definitely a very, very long day.
At the end of that, you don't realize how exhausted you are after that kind of experience until your mind can like relax a little bit. And then you are just gassed.
Oh, yeah. It's coming from a background of ski mountaineering. I'm used to the just put your head down, constant forward motion. Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Just the next step's the most important part. And I mean, that night was just, from mechanical failures to, teammates being exhausted to, just the cold. It was November in Canyonlands. It can be, I don't know how cold it got that night, but it was cold. It was a factor.
Yeah.
And you just keep going.
You need
constant
a zero
forward.
bag.
Yeah. Constant forward motion.
So you've led groups on the Utah Traverse, but intimate groups.
Yeah. It's very much, if you get invited on one of these trips, we've probably been on a trip before.
Because you got to vet people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I don't just take anybody out there. I'm not a great babysitter.
Right.
And everybody because when I was learning, it was very much, you have to be self-sufficient. I mean, it's how I learned how to work on cars.
Yeah.
Very thankful that my early days with my Land Rover out there in Utah, that Mark Oliveris and Steve Rupp were very patient. And, they taught me, like, here are the tools that you need, and you need to be able to remove a drive shaft. You need to be able to replace a U-joint. You need to be able to, replace a CV joint, in the field. And I would go home back to LA and practice it in the driveway.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's nothing worse on a trip. Well, there's a few things worse, but in terms of someone on your team or a companion, there's not much worse than the guy whose truck isn't prepared and who is constantly having another problem that they need help with and is constantly behind the curve of the group. Like, you can always count on him to kind of mess things up.
Yeah, well, and they usually bring something else to the table.
Yeah.
There's going to be good campfire banter. There's going to be, there's something, or they bring the best bottle of whiskey, whatever it is, the pack of cigars, whatever it is. They usually have some other value, and that's why they keep getting invited back.
Right.
But it's fun. I can't remember who told me, but they're like, it's not enough to get invited on a trip. You got to get invited back.
Yeah.
And that's such a major key. And for me, I never wanted to be the slowest. I never wanted to be the liability, and I know that I kept getting invited back because I took good pictures of people.
Yeah. Well, photography is one of your talents, but we should back up a little bit here, Sinuhe, because you were a professional skier at a very young age. You've reinvented yourself multiple times. I think that's fair to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, photographer, commercial director, artist, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very fortunate at an early age to get sponsored by the North Face. I think it was maybe a little bit of proximity in Montana where it was a hot zone. And
grew up in Bozeman, right?
I grew up in Bozeman and skied Bridger Bowl and Big Sky. And I, ended up in some magazines and that sort of thing and a couple of Warren Miller flicks. And it was, it was an incredible thing to be a part of. And
I should just interject. This is before the snowboard revolution.
Yeah. Well, it was during.
Okay. During.
And for me, I had a little bit of a crisis because I really identified with snowboarders and that whole vibe. I had the first half pipe in Montana was in my backyard. I mean, to this day, I run into people that are like, "Oh, I skated that ramp in Montana." I've had Tony Hawk skate it. Reggie Watts has skated it.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's one of, so I was really, all my friends were snowboarders. The people that I liked traveling with were snowboarders. And the skiers were really pushing the envelope of the bigger it wasn't so much about this aesthetic line. I was guiding with Lonnie Ball at Montana Powder Guides, and we took Craig Kelly and Brian Iguchi into the Crazy Mountains. And Craig Kelly passed away 21 years ago in an avalanche, unfortunately. Eric Blem just wrote an incredible book on the whole his life and the avalanche. But I spent 2 days with those guys, and the way they interpreted the mountain, that's the way I wanted to ski. But the sponsors didn't want that. They wanted to see big, huge cliff jumps and big, death-defying type of stuff. And I was like, there's no soul in that. Like anybody can jump off a cliff and make a huge crater. The way Craig Kelly and Brian Iguchi were, laying down these lines, down these chutes, that really inspired me.
When you say the way they interpreted the mountain, I take it, because I ski, but I take it what you mean is they found the natural line down the mountain.
Craig Kelly would say that he would, if you dropped, I think, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not exactly sure. He said, if you dropped a soccer ball down this chute, that's the way I'd want to ride it.
Yeah, like
you know,
like how water might flow.
how water might flow. And he was the smoothest, still is one of the smoothest snowboarders to ever snowboard, and that really spoke to me. So as skiing progressed as a sport into bigger,
More gonzo stuff.
I mean, Seth Morrison doing Lincoln rolls, I think is what they were called, off of 40, 50-foot cliffs. That wasn't for me.
Right.
It just wasn't.
Dropping off a cornice.
That wasn't for me. And I slowly kind of backed away from it and got involved with the snowboard industry. Moved to Vail, Colorado, and my roommate at the time was a snowboarder for Burton. And I sold some photos to Burton, and I became a snowboard photographer.
And you're like early 20s at this point, right?
Yeah, really early 20s. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then shot for Burton in the snow, Wave Rave back in the day, and Oakley and all those things. And it was an incredible time. The 90s were really good to me.
Yeah.
But then you get to be, I was in Whistler shooting Burton Groms, and I kind of had this epiphany of, I don't want to be 40 years old hanging out with 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I'd recently met Cooper's mom, who was living in LA, and I decided to move to LA and give filmmaking a shot.
How'd you get a foot in there? Was it the photography that you'd done already that sort of was your calling card? I mean, you sort of had a portfolio, or what?
Well, I mean, it didn't really go as planned. I'd come out here with the intention of, getting into commercial photography. I was shooting for Red Bull a little bit, but it was still action sports, and nobody took an action sports photographer very seriously. So I spent a ton of money on, test shoots with, and it was even kind of figuring out what my voice was as a photographer outside of action sports. So I was doing all these test shoots and building different portfolios, trying to get an agent, going broke, because LA is just designed to take money out of your pockets. You leave the front door, and back then it cost you $100. Today it costs you $200.
Right.
And within probably 6 months, I got my car repossessed on Beverly while I was having breakfast with Coop's mom. She's like, I think that tow truck's hooking up to your car. So I got my car repossessed, and she was just like, you need a PA. You need to be a production assistant. And that's a kind of a bummer to do after you've kind of traveled around the world being an athlete and, photographer. And then you're getting people coffee, you're doing airport runs, you're doing these
Taking
things.
out the trash. It's the entry level.
It's super entry level. I mean, I'm so glad it happened to me. It was the most humbling thing that could have ever happened to me, getting yelled at by, this producer that's, has all sorts of freaking issues on himself, and he's taking it out on me and, these things. But my photography really helped me. This director that I worked with that recently passed away, Douglas Avery, he saw my photography and he said, "Oh, would you shoot on my set?"
Some BTS.
Yeah, some behind the scenes. Would you, it was him and it was Joe Hahn. They really, Joe Hahn, he went and bought like the first Canon digital camera and like this full lens kit, and something I couldn't afford. I was still shooting film, and he was like, "Hey, Sinuhe, you can use this." He basically gave me a Pelican case full of gear. He was like, "Sinuhe, you can go use this on my shoots." And at the time, he was shooting all of like the Linkin Park music videos, and he was this huge music video director. And I got to really learn, working side by side with these directors and DPs, lighting and directing, essentially. Very, very fortunate. So 5 years after moving to LA, losing my car, starting, from scratch, I got into the DGA, which is the Directors Guild of America. After I did, another great mentor of mine, Brian Belichick, he got me in on this eBay project, and I didn't have access to all these toys. So I basically, and when I say toys, like film toys, I didn't have access to cameras. And I'm sure if I would have hustled a little more. I could have talked somebody into doing it, but I'm kind of this guy that doesn't really like asking for favors. I actually hate it. So I shot this stop motion piece with vintage Legos.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it won some awards and all this. And then, I got represented and, went on to direct. And
when you say it was for eBay, it was like a commercial for eBay?
It was very early internet. So it was like trying to make things go viral.
Okay.
Type of thing. Yeah. So it was a commercial for eBay.
Right.
But it wasn't broadcast. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that was the start of my directing career. And I was pretty boxed into this weird comedy thing where, there's these different genres in commercial advertising. And back in the 2000s, it was a really booming industry. I mean, we were flying around on private jets and it was really, really fun. And comedy was a real moneymaker, and if you think of commercials, it's anytime there's a little bit of slapstick to it, that sort of thing. And you could be selling, toilet paper to Armor All, whatever it is. Insurance. Yeah, exactly. Boring stuff. I did this rat killer commercial in New Jersey, and it was literally a fat guy in a rat suit. And I'm sitting there, I'm smoking a cigarette. I don't even smoke. I'm smoking a cigarette outside. And again, an epiphany like I did with the snowboarding. I was like, this is miserable. I don't want to do this. And I think a week later, I called the production company, told them I quit, wasn't into it. And circling back to my roots, I ended up doing a Toyota piece with National Geographic Adventure. And from that, I was able to get into the automotive commercials. Right. And I worked for Toyota for almost 8 years.
I hadn't really thought about the different genres of commercial, but it's really true. And I'm sure it's easy to get pigeonholed.
Well, I mean, they're so afraid of breaking barriers. And there's exceptions to that. There's some great, great, great CDs and ECDs out there that are willing to take a chance and do something groundbreaking. But for the most part, everybody's staying, and especially in the automotive world, because it's such a huge, huge industry.
Right.
And you're dealing with GM, you're dealing with Toyota, these 30 committee people that need to put their stamp on it. And what does a wedding ring mean on that person? Is that okay? And you get into these conversations and it's just like
endlessly splitting hairs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, how thin do we want this hair to get?
Taking all of the sort of the spontaneity and energy out of a piece. And then what happens is someone will be bold and produce an amazing commercial that hits. And then there's like a bunch of copycats.
Exactly. Then it becomes flavor of the month.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, like you can almost call it. I had a conversation the other day with a director friend of mine. He goes, I just hope we come out of all this dark commercial stuff where you can't even see what they're shooting, And 2 years ago, it was the, multiracial family in the car solving a problem with their infotainment system.
Yeah.
And everybody does it, because everything's so data driven now that it tests well. So, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
Which, at the end of the day, with AI coming into the whole program, there's this kind of, we need to stand up to it. And it's like, there's nothing in advertising, there's nothing to stand up to. The agency and client will always go with the cheapest, most efficient route they can go. And if you can produce a commercial that's on brand message and sells those tires, sells that car, sells the toilet paper, they're going to use AI and do it. That's all there is to it. And it's only going to get better. And it's going to be, a creative director, art directors are going to become a prompt inputter and come up with these things.
For my money, AI is really cold and almost, and when I say cold, it kind of puts a chill up my spine because it's so inhuman.
It's the electric car of freaking creativity.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's soulless. The uncanny valley is still there. It hasn't gone away. It hasn't gotten good enough to. In other words, I'm not sold. I immediately feel that way, and I don't want to see, like, I notice all of this AI art, quote unquote, on social media, and I block those accounts. I don't want to see it. It's not interesting to me.
No, I think that there's, there is a coldness to it, and part of my aesthetic has always been this embracing the imperfection.
Yeah.
Like, life is messy. There isn't anything perfect out there. Nature isn't perfect. And when you create something that's perfect, it feels fake. Mm-hmm. And to me, when you create something that's fake, like you're pulling the wool over, you're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
Like,
you want authenticity.
Exactly. And I've done that in my career. I've taken the paycheck,
Sure.
To do it. But as much as I can, I don't want to do that. And I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
Like we do, as humans, like, we do amazing things. We can go out there and create amazing experiences, film them, and sell the stuff to go with it, and it's not that hard.
By the way, what's your latest project, Ben?
Well, I just released a film with the Radivist called From BIOCRUST with Love.
From BIOCRUST with Love.
Yep. And it was a 2-year-long passion project of mine. Thankfully, it almost died due to venture capitalists coming in and pulling out. And, it was it was an up and down road for sure. And we're not talking a ton of money. It was the weirdest thing because it was never a ton of money. But BIOCRUST with Love is going back to the Colorado Plateau. A few years ago, I met Dr. Christina Young, who is one of very few soil crust scientists. She's a doctor in all this, and she studies BIOCRUST on the Colorado Plateau, and BIOCRUST holds the desert together. Without BIOCRUST, we would have nothing but sand dunes across Utah. And sand dunes are not endemic to that landscape. So when we go and we drive over, or we overgraze, or
we disturb the
BIOCRUST, what happens is the wind just starts moving that sand. And when that sand starts to move, it's really hard to keep in place again. So BIOCRUST is really important. And to me, it's been really important to me since I first found out what it was. And if you've ever spent any time on the Colorado Plateau, you've probably seen it. It's this black dirt that kind of has these spires to it that come up in between the sagebrush and rabbit brush. And it literally holds the desert together. So when John Watson from the Radivist asked me if I wanted to do a film with them, I said yes, but it has to be about BIOCRUST, and it has to be really weird.
That's awesome. So has it been released?
It has been released. It was just released last week.
Wow.
So,
okay.
yeah,
so
I'll send you a link.
Thank you. So it's available online.
Yep. Available online.
So I'll put that in the show notes because I want people to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really important. I mean, when living in the West, the Colorado Plateau, the Colorado River runs right through it. And the Colorado Plateau is just west of the Rocky Mountains. And what's happening, and what has been happening over the last 20, 30 years, is we're getting these huge dust storms in the spring, which is the windiest time on the Colorado Plateau. And those dust storms cause the snow to turn red. You've probably seen news reports about snow turning red. It's not just red. It makes that snow melt faster and sublimate. And when you don't have that snow holding as long, we don't have as many water reserves in the West, which is a problem.
Right, because you need to give the snow time to percolate down into the aquifer.
Exactly.
Rather than run off
or sublimate, which there have been, I don't know if it's been proven, but there have been some theories that the snow melting, sublimating faster, which means turning into clouds,
right.
That sort of thing, is causing the thunderstorms and severe weather out in the eastern plains.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
This is fascinating. Now, does the BIOCRUST exist outside the Colorado Plateau, or is this...
So BIOCRUST exists everywhere.
That's what I figured.
Any desert has a BIOCRUST. Not necessarily in sand dunes.
Right.
You will see BIOCRUST in sections of sand dunes, primarily down in the bottoms where the wind doesn't get to. Sometimes you'll see like a creosote bush,
Sure.
To see the Saharan sand dunes that have like zero vegetation is very rare.
Right.
The Altar Desert in northern Mexico, Glamis, all those spots, you're going to see vegetation in there. And that's because there's been this little foothold of BIOCRUST.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've actually observed this myself in the Mojave Desert and in the Sonoran Desert. And it sounds so weird, but I've gotten down close to the ground on multiple occasions, just studying things, because the desert really is fascinating. People think of it as a lifeless place, but it's actually teeming with life. And if you get down close, you will see tiny plants and insects, and it is held together. And there's a lot going on, even in a few square feet.
Yeah, and even in the Mojave, you'll see that black BIOCRUST,
right?
Especially in the Granite Mountains, you'll really see it there. And the reason you see it and it's noticeable is because of the freeze-thaw cycle that it goes through. So it ends up turning into these spires as it freezes and thaws. Otherwise, like down in the Sonoran Desert, it's just flat,
right?
But it's there. And if you were to get down, like you were saying, on your knees and pull up some of that granular, you'll see these teeny little tendrils,
right?
And that's the BIOCRUST,
and it's microorganisms.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I can't wait to see this. What's the running time on it?
10.5 minutes.
Oh man,
it's so digestible.
So good.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the thing is, Dr. Christina Young, I've never met anybody so excited and enthusiastic about dirt.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much about her and how interconnected the desert is to the mountains and the hydrological cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's important to all of us. And as users of the outdoors, whether we're in our Land Rovers, our Toyotas, our side-by-sides, our motorcycles, our bikes, our feet, just have a little bit of conscientiousness as you travel goes a long way.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can be a real pain sometimes when you drive, half a mile out of your way to turn around. But when you turn around on a 2-track and you create a 3-point turn, then the next guy that comes along goes, oh, that could be a camping spot.
Yeah.
And then those 15 people come by and all of a sudden you've got this huge piece. And it's not a big deal when it's 3 or 4 people. But when you compound that over the course of a year and it's thousands of people,
you end up with cul-de-sacs.
Exactly.
In the desert.
And you see it all over the place.
Yeah.
You see it all over the place.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Wow. This is fascinating stuff. I've always been in love with the desert. I think you have too. And what's your favorite desert? Is it Utah?
I would have to say that it's the Colorado Plateau for sure.
Yeah.
And the Colorado Plateau stretches from, mid Utah down into northern Arizona, over into Colorado.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing place. And I've spent 30 years exploring it. And every time I go out, I find something new. And that's what I love about it. I really equate it to when I found the map of the Colorado Plateau, it was crumbled up. And as I spend more time out there, I'm able to flatten it out and iron it out a little bit and see some more. And it's just, there's so much out there. It's incredible.
I got to tell you about a desert experience I had about 15 years ago. We went to the Atacama Desert now people think of the Atacama as Chile, which it is mainly, but I was in southern Peru, and we had a local guide in a Nissan Patrol, and he took us out into the desert, and I saw fossilized whales on the desert floor. We found shark's teeth on the desert floor because that was all once an inland sea. And the geological features were absolutely incredible. Rock spires that were eroded by the wind, very off-world landscapes, and of course NASA's training for Mars there because it most approximates the Martian surface and the conditions they might expect. But yeah, it was such an amazing experience. I wanted to be able to spend days and days out there. We didn't have time, so we weren't able to even spend overnight there. But if you haven't been, you have got to go. You would die for it.
Yeah, the Atacama is a zone. I've just touched the southern end of it in Chile.
Okay.
But I definitely want to get into the Peruvian, that area that you're in.
Yeah.
That you're speaking of. I've heard so much about it, and yeah, it's one of the few deserts that I haven't. I've spent quite a bit of time over in Morocco and in that Western Sahara. A little bit of time down in Namibia, but yeah, the Atacama is super interesting.
Yeah. I haven't been to Africa. I'd like to go. Deserts, all deserts are fascinating. There's the Gobi in China, another. And
for sure.
I would love to go to Mongolia.
Oh, Mongolia. I read the book, The Last Dragon Hunter, about Roy Chapman Andrews. It's considered the first overland scientific expedition where Ford, I believe it was Ford, sponsored it. But it was so far and so deep, they actually had camels carrying the fuel for them.
Wait, weren't they in Model Ts or something?
Something like that, yeah. It's such a great book.
Wow.
Such a great book.
Say the title again?
The Last Dragon Hunter.
Okay.
And it's a story of Roy Chapman Andrews. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a whole history of overlanding through the 20th century that if you really wanted to dig deep, some incredible tales of people who took unlikely vehicles deep into nowhere, motorcycles and cars, and just a lot of European travelers kind of opening up expeditions to the Far East or even Southeast Asia. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's overland travel by vehicle is obviously an evolution of horse packing, wagon train, camels, depending on what continent you're on. And, I never really dove into the Europeans. My mom had a 1980 Jeep CJ7, and we would do the Rubicon Trail on the weekends when it wasn't, something that you had to have these huge monster buggies for. And so for me, Mark Smith from Georgetown, who started the Jeep Jamboree, he did this Expedición de las Americas where he drove from Ushuaia to Prudhoe Bay.
Oh, wow.
Through the Darien Gap.
In a Jeep.
Yeah. And this was 1979. And he's kind of credited with creating four-wheeling in America as we know it as a sport.
Right.
Which I think that's a big differentiation between the way North America does it as to the Europeans, where it's more of a traveler, whereas here we created King of the Hammers. It's bonkers.
Right. Explain the Darien Gap, by the way, for people who don't know.
Yeah, so the Darien Gap is this 90-mile section of jungle between Panama and Colombia, and there's never been a road put through it, and there's a lot of speculation as to why. I think that if you listen to the State Department, they say that it's too dangerous, that it's the cartels run it, blah, 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 blah. There's also the speculation that they don't want a road through because it opens up trade to South America.
Right.
There's not even a railroad through there.
Right.
Railroad would be, you would think that building a railroad through there would be an easy thing. So there's been, the speculation, we don't want to have, trade, it opens up the trade. It's going to cut out Central America, from the trade we have with the U.S. So whatever it is, but it's an unforgiving jungle. I know from hearing stories from Mark Smith that it took him 30 days from from where the road ended on the Colombian side to where they picked up the road again on the Panamanian side. And when a group flew back to pick up some equipment at the beginning, the trail had already overgrown.
Wow. Well, some guys tried to do it in a Range Rover in 72. And they had support of the Royal Air Force and the British Army, and they helicoptered supplies in. And I think ultimately they had to lift the vehicle with the helicopter, half a kilometer or whatever, in order to keep going.
Right. Yeah. And those guys, I think they're credited with being the first to drive.
So.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. Yeah,
it's been a while since I've read those stories, but I can picture that. It was a 2-door Range Rover, very early Range Rover.
With the huge ladders on it and bridges, it's amazing. And that, I think there's something really incredible about, and it's still alluring to me. And whenever I have the opportunity to jump on a trip like that, I'm all for it. I have 0% interest in doing the Darien Gap.
Right.
Don't want to do that. I've grown too comfortable with my life.
Yeah. I think there's probably something to that theory about the road opening trade up, making trade so easy, because we invested a lot in the Panama Canal. The world is dependent on it. And there's only 2 ways to get stuff between North and South America, or South America and Central America, and it's by air or by water, right? So economically, I can see that there's an incentive to keep that road from being built.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I don't want to get into geopolitics at all, but it's the fact that here's a continent,
right,
that we don't. Every other continent has roads all the way across them, all the way up and down them.
Yeah,
but not us.
Yeah, it's very interesting. For heaven's sakes, we've tunneled under the English Channel. You'd think we could build a road.
Yeah, we could figure out the Darien Gap if we wanted to.
Yeah, very interesting. Wow, there's a documentary there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. It could be like Fitzcarraldo.
Fitzcarraldo,
isn't that Werner Herzog's film?
Gosh, I haven't seen that one. I got to look that up.
It's about the guy that wants to build an opera in the Bolivian jungle, and he's got to bring a boat over a mountain. It's Werner Herzog.
That
just
sounds very
bonkers.
That sounds very Herzog. Wow, yeah. That's so cool. You talked about Mark Smith, who founded the Jeep Jamboree and did this expedition, but you got to spend some time with him, right?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I got to spend time with him. I was working with Jeep. We were shooting some commercials for them, and Jeep Jamboree does a really great job of supporting their shoots on the Rubicon. It's really unique that Jeep shoots there. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see if they keep doing it, because the last job I was actually contacted about, they wanted to shoot it on one of those LED screens. Yeah. And they're like, well, just put the Jeep in there and we're going to paint a rock and the LED screens in the background. And I was like, I don't know. I think I'm busy. But anyway, if you guys are interested in shooting on the Rubicon Trail, my number. I'll be there.
There you go.
But I'm not shooting on a stage in Hawthorne. Anyway, back to Mark Smith. I was very fortunate to spend time with him and his family, both at Rubicon Springs and his home in Georgetown before he passed away. And hearing his stories, it's so inspiring, because he kind of founded what 4-wheel drive is today
in America.
The United States, in America. Yeah. The going over a trail for the sake of just going over a trail, the Rubicon being the one,
right.
He built the South Lake Tahoe Airport. There's so many aspects to his life that were so incredible, and when you talk about reinventing yourself, is it reinventing or is it just evolution? I feel, I don't know how I could stay in the same job doing the same. And I think that's why photography, creativity, being an artist, working on my own projects really speaks to me, because I would just get bored. I get really just kind of bored doing the same thing day in and day out.
Well, it seems to me like you were acclimated at an early age to sort of a flux, a change. Like a lot of people, they live in the same town. They all go to the same school with the same people. And then they sort of matriculate out of that into jobs in that same town with those same people. And pretty soon you're 40 years old. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But getting you out of your comfort zone early seems like maybe a catalyst for what came afterwards. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I think that there's some validity to that for sure. I've never been afraid of starting something new, of trying something new. I think that holds a lot of people back, is this fear of failure. I've definitely come across it. I've realized like, oh, you're afraid of failing right now. You're afraid of this rejection. You're afraid, and you're no worse off after the question.
Yeah.
Like they're either going to say yes or no.
Have you ever struggled with imposter syndrome?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's, when I first started directing, I did. And that was a lot because I had some pretty mean things said about me by people that I held in pretty high regard, who I was more valuable to them as an assistant than as a director and their competitor. I felt great validation when I got some jobs that they didn't.
So they wanted to burn you.
Yeah. Yeah.
They saw you as being disloyal for
exactly. To move up.
Wow.
And it was pretty heartbreaking because I'd worked pretty closely with these people, and then they get in your head and you're going, well, maybe I don't deserve to be here, and maybe they're right. But then I got beyond that pretty quick.
Yet another reason to get out on the trail with a couple of good friends and clear your head, right? It's so restorative.
Well, not only that, but it's also being, the confidence that you get from being out on the trail, and especially alone. Like I do more trips alone than I do with other people. When you're 60, 70 miles from pavement and you're alone and you know that you can fix your truck, that you can get out of there no matter what, it kind of makes all these people that are living in their glass houses, they don't really matter, because it's like, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family at all. I have succeeded on my own. And, I think Cooper's mom was a big part of that. She gets a ton of credit. But being out on the trail and having that confidence is, like the other people just don't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a perspective you gain there that's difficult to find elsewhere.
Oh, completely. Because you have no control out there.
I think it's just also deep down in our visceral selves. This is going to be, again, I'm getting philosophical, you guys. I apologize, but I can't resist it. When you are standing in the desert and you're looking up at the Milky Way and there's no light pollution from the city, you can't hear the sounds of garbage trucks or the neighbor's dog barking or somebody's TV 2 doors down. I mean, that isolation, but also that vast expanse around you, there's nothing like it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's, like you said, it's in our DNA. It is at a cellular level that we need that raw nature. We need to be able to look out on a landscape and not see a telephone pole, not see a road, not see lights. We need to be able to see that and feel what that's like. And there's so many people that don't get that.
You said it better than I could. This brings us back to Edward Abbey, by the way. This is what he was spent his whole life like trying to grasp.
It's what he was preaching. Like
Yeah.
it's absolutely what he was preaching. His whole thing was to get out of the car.
Right.
His whole thing was like, we don't need more pavement.
Right.
And I had a bumper sticker for a while that said, "Stop the brutal paving." And it's true because and Edward Abbey was the one that pointed it out. It was like, you're making it easier for people to access it, but if you kept it hard, they would still come and they wouldn't turn into sloths.
Right.
You know, we're going to turn into the people from Wall-E.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, a counterpoint to that is the automobile gives us an unparalleled freedom. And then combine that with all the public lands in the Western U.S. It's just like such a great recipe. You could spend the rest of your life in a very simple 4x4 exploring the West and never have to see the same thing twice. And that is awesome.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Even the small section of Utah from east of the 15, south of the 70, I still haven't driven all the roads there. There's still places I haven't been. And I spend so much time out there.
Yeah.
You know, I spend a ton. I get a lot of my local knowledge from ranchers. Mm-hmm. You know, I've got quite a few ranchers that I can call and, you know, say, hey, what are the road conditions like? And it's funny when I get a call from them out of the blue going, hey, we're thinking of heading over in this zone. Have you heard anything?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's how often you're out there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
and
really
it's so fun to be out there in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, I've got, you know, my Chevy Colorado that's got all the things and can go anywhere. And, you know, you think you're out there doing something special, and these guys are out there in their, you know, huge Dodge Ram, you know, dually towing a trailer with full of cows or horses. And you're like, okay. Yeah, I guess that's neat.
No, that is humbling. I've had that experience too, because anytime you go out there, you wind up meeting a local or two, and it's just another Tuesday for them, man. And you could easily get high on your horse being like, yeah, here I am out in the middle of nowhere and, you know, doing it. And all of a sudden,
yeah, absolutely. It's really, again, going back to that thing of learning, you know, learning how to pack lighter and do that. I was on a motorcycle trip riding from Bogota to Venezuela, and we're all on these big GSs, Gore-Tex suits, you know, Gore-Tex boots. It was all the gear, you know, dry bags, everything.
Looked like a catalog.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was insane. And we're riding along, and one of the guys straps breaks, and he's got stuff spread for half a mile behind him. So we all pull over in the shade. And this, you know, down there, they're all riding 125s.
Right.
This family of four with the lady on the back sitting on a stick, two kids on either side of her, and then in cages hanging off the sticks, chickens.
Right.
Come riding down the road. And you're just like, all right, I could be out here just doing my thing on a 125. I don't need this big, huge piece of German engineering.
That's so funny. This is the same as like, you go to Baja and you might be in some fancy rig, and here comes a local dude in a 2-wheel drive Toyota SR5 pickup that's all beat up, and he's got 4 bald tires. You know, he's doing the same thing you're doing. So you're not special.
Exactly. And in fact, like those guys, especially Baja, I've spent so much time in Baja recently, and those guys are a different kind of frontier. I mean, it's so wild down there.
Well, you know my buddy Michael Emery.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love Michael.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Incredible guy. I've really enjoyed spending time down there with him.
Yeah.
Like not only because he has a bottle of tequila in his holster at all times.
Right.
But yeah.
Fortaleza.
Yeah, Fortaleza. That guy, he's just all time. He's got such great stories. And
I got to just give a shout out to Michael. He's the guy that's responsible for the safari class in the Mexican 1000, which is like a vintage 4x4 class.
Exactly. I mean, that was really the gateway drug for me to get into the Mexican 1000 was the safari class, because you weren't really racing. You were kind of on the course, but not really on the course, and still got to go to the parties and stuff. And, you know, it evolved into actually racing,
right?
Which was great. And I think it's a great entry into it. And now he's doing his vintage Baja expeditions, which is awesome for somebody that's Baja curious,
right?
Like wants to go down there, but maybe doesn't have the friend group to do it, like you can sign up for one of these expeditions and go with Michael, who him and his crew just know that peninsula so well.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes, you guys, for Michael Emery's
Slow Baja.
Slow Baja. Just look up Slow Baja. But anyway, it'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
He's so much slower's better.
Yeah.
Someday you'll realize, Sinuhe, slower's better.
Tranquilo.
Tranquilo vibes.
Hey, listen, you were talking to me before we started about a trip that you did with your son, Cooper. Do you want to bring him in? And
let's bring Cooper in.
We can talk
Let's
about
bring
it.
Cooper in.
Cooper, how old are you?
I'm 10 years old.
And you've pretty much grown up on the trail with your dad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your favorite trip been with your dad?
My favorite trip done with my dad is the Green River because I was stuck with him for 7 days.
Wow, okay. 7 days out in the middle of nowhere.
No, on the Green River in the canyon lands. Well, basically in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. What was your favorite thing about it?
That I got to swim, and if I dunked my head underwater, I could probably see some fish. The camping was really fun. We saw a beaver skull.
Wow.
Did you find any arrowheads?
Yeah. 7, 8.
Yeah, did we see lots of ruins?
Yeah.
And then you also you drive a lot when we're off-road, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, how long have you been driving?
I think I've been driving like 6 years.
Okay, and what was that first thing that you remember driving in?
Probably the Land Rover 90.
Yeah, that one, huh? And what about, you drove a Sprinter van once? Do you remember that?
Yeah. I would drive on like those big trails.
He's been coming out with me.
Come get a little closer there.
He's been coming out with me since he was 3 months old, was his first camping trip. I've got a picture of him, just sitting in one of those camp chairs where he can't get out as a teeny little baby. And it's been great to have him along on all these trips. He's evolved as a camper. He's really independent. He knows his chores. He can drive for, now he can drive for miles, 15, 20 miles off road, and does a great job. It was funny when he first started doing it as a 5-year-old, he would, look around and have his 5-year-old curiosity checking everything out. And we'd almost drive into the ditch a few times, but now he's
Maybe some bushes.
definitely some bushes. We definitely ran into some bushes.
Yeah.
But, having him out there and just having him see the world, he's really taken on an appreciation of the ancient Pueblo. Mm-hmm. We've been able to get into a lot of archaeology together. It's been really great and really important to me to get him out there and develop those skills and to see that, you can, be independent out there and be self-sufficient out there.
Now, you wrote an article about this trip, right, in Adventure Journal?
Yeah, I wrote an article about the Green River trip in Adventure Journal.
Yeah.
I think it's issue 24.
Okay.
Which, it was an incredible trip. And I'm not a river guy. I went on a river trip a couple weeks beforehand with Dr. Christina Young, actually. It was fantastic. It was such a great trip.
That's great.
Yeah. And Coop, it's where I learned as a father to give him responsibilities.
Yeah.
It was like, here are your responsibilities. As soon as I gave him the map, and what else did I have you do? What else was your responsibility on that trip? You were responsible for finding where the tent goes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, scouting out a place to put the tent up.
Or I just sit in the back, lay down in that weird little floaty thingy.
Oh, yeah, you floated really good. Yeah, yeah. So, but as soon as I gave him responsibilities, and that's become a theme on every one of our trips, is giving him, responsibility. He loves to navigate, can read a map really well.
That's good.
So, yeah.
It's going to serve him well in the years to come.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. Hey, Cooper, thanks for sitting in. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Coop.
Coop.
I'll go back.
I'm glad we could get that in there. So, Sinuhe, we're both car guys. I think we both care about design in cars. We both care about where the car industry is going. And I just wondered what are your thoughts on cars today? What's exciting to you? What's interesting to you?
cars today they've become, it's funny, back in 2009, I had an assistant working for me that drove a Prius, and she called it Cartopia. She goes, and so smart of her, because she was like, Sinuhe, in the future, everyone's going to just drive the same car. It's not going to matter. And I was working at Bandito Brothers, I wasn't working there, but it was the production company that I was with, Mouse McCoy, Greg Tracy, car guys through and through. The cars that we had in the office on any given day were incredible. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not even possible. Like, that's not. And here we are, 15 years later, it is Cartopia. If you took the badge off of, all the cars out there, and you actually, this is the analogy. Just yesterday, I took this Defender 90, a Coastline Rover, a Coastline Defender, beautiful car. We covered it in rugs, right? I think it's a 95 Defender 90. We covered it in rugs. You could still tell exactly what car that was.
Sure.
There's no question what car that was. For the uninitiated, could have been a Jeep. Could have been an F. In fact, most people would go, oh, nice Jeep. So maybe some people an FJ40, something like that. But for anyone that knows cars, that's a Defender. If you did that with 90% of the cars and trucks that are out there right now, you wouldn't be able to tell it from a Mercedes to a Hyundai to a Toyota to a Nissan.
So true.
And they've just lost the plot. Again, we touched on it with advertising. Everything is data driven. The data with the cars is the safety, the wind, the fuel efficiency. Until you get up into the halo cars, the ones that we don't care what this does as long as it goes fast.
Right.
All the consumer cars, they're just boring. We've hit Cartopia.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right about that. And I find myself trying to identify cars in traffic, and I'm more wrong now than I ever have been. I get close to something and I'm like, oh, that's not an Acura. That's whatever. That's a Kia.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever.
Whatever it is.
You and I are about the same age. When we were growing up, you could tell what kind of car was coming at you at night just by the headlights.
By the headlights. And now there's not that. And I don't see myself craning my neck like I did unless it's an older car.
Yeah.
And it could be a 73 Buick Riviera.
Yep.
But that car's got so much more style than anything that's on the road.
A friend of mine just bought a 79 Lincoln Continental town car.
Yeah.
And it's like a beautiful medium metallic blue with a blue vinyl top and a plushy interior. Dude, this car is I love seeing it go down the road. He's daily driving it. He's happy as a clam.
It's like driving a couch through traffic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
It's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to, there needs to be somebody out there, that is willing to take a chance, and design something that's just cool. I love some of these smaller retrofitters that's the exciting part of electric cars to me, that are doing these things where they're, taking an old Volkswagen and putting an electric drivetrain in there.
Right.
That's interesting to me. That the Volkswagen Beetle is such a, beautiful car. Carmen Ghia, beautiful car. These new cars are just so, you can tell they were designed by AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's very little, I think we've lost that time where there was the Carmen Ghia, the Pininfarina, designing a car, that's putting their name on a car.
That's actually an interesting example. So the new Ferrari 12-cylinder, which is, they're calling it the 12-cylinder, came out. It was revealed this week, and it's an in-house design. It's kind of referential to the Ferrari Daytona of the 1970s. And I've seen so much negative feedback on it already. People are saying, this is terrible. The name stinks. The design stinks. And 99.99% of these people will never own a Ferrari. But the visceral hate on this thing has been crazy in the last few days. And if any car company is supposed to like knock your socks off with a very distinctive characteristic design. It's Ferrari. Like, you don't expect Ferrari to be watered down and sort of generic.
Data driven.
Right.
Like, what was that Ferrari that they put it side by side with a Mazda? There was that meme going around that it was pick the Ferrari, and it was a, Ferrari and a Mazda.
I think it was the Puro Sangue.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'll never be in that tax bracket, so I don't really pay attention to it.
Right. Yeah.
I'm more of a slow, poorly designed off-roader guy.
you need a transfer case. That's
exactly.
Or center differential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sinuhe Xavier, filmmaker, photographer, artist, off-roader, general Renaissance guy. Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me and making the effort. It's been great. I love talking about myself.
Well, let's get out on the trail, man.
Yeah, let's do it. I love the idea of what our original idea was of doing one of these out there, and let's do it and have a subject to really dive deep.
Definitely. So so we were originally going to meet up in the Anza Borrego Desert out here in Southern California, and that kind of fell through. But I think we should really plan it and do it right.
Yeah, it'd be so much fun. It'd be so much fun.
Your website is sinuhexavier.com, right?
It is. And that you can find me on socials anywhere. My name, SINUHEXAVIER.com, and see what I'm up to.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
fun.
Maurice.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, follow the podcast, tell your friends, leave a review, and support the show at buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. And don't forget to check the show notes for any useful links. I put them in there for you. And join me back here on Wednesday, May 22nd for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.